Hi, and welcome to the LinkedIn Live broadcast on the release of the ISM Manufacturing PMI Report. My name is Dan Zeiger. I'm a senior writer and editor for Inside Supply Management. That's Institute for Supply Management's member publication. And we're glad you've joined us as we discuss the manufacturing PMI data for November. To our American viewers, we hope you had a great Thanksgiving weekend, and we wish you and all of yours the best for the upcoming holiday season, no matter where in the globe that you're joining us from today. There was more economic uncertainty throughout the manufacturing sector as pullbacks in new orders and employment, along with trade and tariff anxieties. I know, big breaking news there, kept factories largely in neutral, and that led to a slight decrease in the composite PMI to 48.2%. That's the ninth straight month in contraction territory. Prices index didn't move much, which elicited a small exhale, but supplier deliveries moved into faster territory, which given the context is not a great sign. And that's something that I want to discuss with Susan Spence today. But to discuss matters like that, we do need an expert, and we've got a great one. Her name is Susan Spence, and she's the chair of the ISM Manufacturing Services Committee, Survey Committee. Hi, Susan. How are you?
Hi, I'm great, Dan. Welcome, and welcome to all the viewers. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Let's get started with what stood out to you in November, but I guess I'll frame it this way. I mean, in recent months, you've discussed the series of one-time improvements that are flowing through supply chains. It's been evident in the data, moving from index to index to index, as you pointed out. Just how did it manifest in November?
Exactly how we predicted it would. With every month that we are in the chaos and whiplash of tariffs, as our panelists like to call it, I think we keep, unfortunately, get proven right, which is a increase in new order in 1 month, unless it's followed by several months of new orders, is just going to be a wave through the supply chain. As we saw in August, we had a new order strengthening, and then production followed that with a bump. Backlog followed that, but after every bump is a return back. So we're still in contraction. And we're going to continue to be, in my opinion, until we see some certainty with the trade policy of the U.S. We now have a Supreme Court case that we're all waiting on, which could be several months, could be mid next year or springtime. So these blips, I feel pretty comfortable that they have more to do with customer inventories being so low that reordering is having happen. The other thing that I'm fearing, and with every month that we're in this, I fear more, is that our international customers of these businesses are getting more and more time to go figure out where else to get their goods. Certainly, that's what I would have done if I had a supplier that continued to increase prices. Not the fault of the manufacturing sector, of course, but at some point, the risk of volatility, increasing pricing, and not knowing what's going to happen next, frankly, will drive at some point these international customers to go elsewhere and lower their risk.
Yeah, I know some of our viewers will be partaking in their favorite holiday movies in the next month or so, but Sue and I have Groundhog Day for you today. That, unfortunately, I mean, noun, verb, tariffs. I mean, does that pretty much sum up the panelist sentiment again? I mean, you had a question earlier today. I mean, you were asked about the shutdown, you were asked about the AI bubble, and you said, no, those weren't really on the panelists' minds in November.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We've had two small interest rate reductions. It is not moving the needle for these companies. Mm-hmm. It is far outweighed and wiped out, frankly, by the possibility of just huge increases in the raw material inputs. So companies continue to not hire. 67%, I believe, of our panelists had said instead of hiring, they're holding. And some are laying off, of course, so folks are losing their jobs. We don't have fresh BLS economic data, unfortunately, but we pay attention to what our panelists are telling us. The other thing that's very interesting to me is the strong contraction of manufacturing GDP continues to be high, 39% this month versus 41. Overall contraction remained at 58, but since August, if you look at just the strong contraction, so that is an index below 45, it was down at the 4% level for strong contraction for manufacturing GDP. in August, jumped to 28 in September, jumped to 41 in October. It's at 39 now, not much better. So the combination of that plus what our panelists are telling us is giving me not a lot of confidence that anything's going to change anytime soon. And once tariffs are settled one way or the other, I still think we have some time for shaking it out and figuring out what's going to happen. In the meantime, customers that can go elsewhere seem to be going elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, related to tariffs, you talked about a dynamic about this. You noticed it in the comments, and you mentioned it in an earlier interview. I'm really glad you did, because we had a story about this to that extent in the current issue of Inside Supply Management, and we'll put the link in the chat for our viewers to partake. Many companies are still saying it's still cheaper to source overseas, even with the tariffs,
right?
And it's giving them a little incentive to find domestic suppliers. We called it the mixed reshoring bag was our headline in the story, and we wrote. Yeah, just talk about that. Talk about that dynamic.
Sure. I mean, it makes sense to me. I'll go back to my experience in aerospace. For commercial aerospace components, certainly not defense, but if we had a 50% labor arbitrage in some cases for commercial airplane components, there was a huge case assuming that whatever country that was in, there was capability. And we always did a great job trying to make sure we understood that, and a lot of testing. If you've got that kind of labor arbitrage and, labor is half of the cost of your bill of material, then you have a great incentive to do that. Raw material prices going up from other countries, certainly, as one panelist noted, it just erodes the margin, but the tariffs don't wipe out the goodness or the financial goodness of staying in a low cost producing country. So I also thought the transportation equipment comment about this particular company saying we're finally starting to do permanent changes. So to me it seems that they don't feel anything's going to change anytime soon. So let's permanently reduce staff. Let's restate our guidance to the shareholders in the market. And then, ironically, additional offshore sources, not fewer, but more, versus making, components in the U.S. and exporting them because, it's not financially feasible. So these tariffs are having the opposite effect. Hopefully folks are listening and seeing and using data to understand that. And, perhaps that helps course correct. We'll see.
Yeah. Before we move on, I mean, one more question on trade, at least. I mean, I was surprised at the level of confusion that was evident in the comments. And I'll cite a panelist in electrical equipment, appliances, and components. He or she wrote that trade is clouded and difficult. Suppliers are finding more and more errors when attempting to export to the U.S. before I even have the opportunity to import. Yeah, discuss that level of confusion. Was it a surprise?
So if the manufacturing companies are confused, think about what it's like at the border, at the ports, right? Way back in March and April, when Tim Fiore was still doing the report, he talked about especially small companies that don't have custom brokerage departments. So this assumes that the U.S. government is efficiently, change their process to reflect whatever the tariffs are. But if they change that much, they're on, they're off, they're changed. Can you imagine how difficult that is? So the folks that are probably working very hard to try to give guidance when it changes that often, I can see where the confusion would be.
Yeah. Well, yeah, going and it's a good segue to the supplier deliveries. And it might be manifesting in this. After 3 months in expansion, the index moved into contraction. That means faster deliveries, which typically indicates lower demand, a sluggish economy. I suggested in the opening that wasn't a good sign. I mean, are we off base on that?
I don't think you are off base, unfortunately. The other reason for faster deliveries would be that all of a sudden companies got really, really efficient and cut their lead times. And, what indication do we have that that's happening at all? If new orders are down and there's only the occasional bump that flows through the supply chain like a wave, then all we can surmise is there's not as much work to congest the supply chain. So we like seeing it slower, not because it's necessarily good to have to wait for your stuff, but it could indicate a healthy economy.
Yeah. Another index reading that is going to get closely watched, especially in this time where federal data is spotty, to put it mildly, is the employment index. That registered 44% in November. And Rick Santelli on CNBC, when he was going through the data, he called that a big miss. And 3.4 to 1 ratio among the comments of reductions to hiring. And among companies surveyed, 10.8% reported increasing staff. That was down from 13.1% in October. Just discuss the landscape, and how it's reflected in our data.
Yeah, so we track the we call it hire force managed ratio. So for every person hiring, there's 3.4 that aren't. It was back. I'm just looking over in the history. Back in August, it was more like 1 to 4, 1 to 3, 1 to 3.4, and of course, employment index lost 2 points. So the numbers make sense if the order flow, like I said earlier, doesn't come, not just once, but every month for several months. I look for 3 points, before I start to maybe breathe a little easy. Then it doesn't surprise me to hear what Rick had said about those numbers. The panelists have continued to say the same things they have been. We're just trying to do the work with the current force so we don't have to lay off. We're not backfilling retirees. We're not backfilling people that have left for other opportunities. And that is going to continue to be the case as long as orders aren't forthcoming and backlog is not forthcoming. You don't need the folks. Why would you hire in anticipation of something that doesn't look like it's going to happen anyway? So, and with the GDP numbers, like we said, 39% in strong contraction, 58 manufacturing GDP, 58% in contraction, is not good. So it's not a good, picture. I also look at University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index. That is really, really low. It's almost 30 points lower than it was last November. So if consumers, and now we're talking about consumer goods, and I understand we have more sectors than that, but in November of 2024, the index of consumer sentiment was 71.8%. It's 50.3. The index of consumer expectations, what will happen in the future, last November was 76.9. It is 49. Those are very scary numbers. And so if folks aren't feeling optimistic about what's going to happen, especially with prices, and on top of that, if they're worried about their jobs, right, because employment numbers are not going the right way, it's a big signal. So for those manufacturing markets that have a, consumer, commercial consumer, folks aren't feeling good about it. And when you're not feeling good about what's happening either with your job or prices, what are you going to do? You're probably not going to buy stuff, right? You're going to hold off unless, they talk about the K-shaped, economy, meaning, people in the top 1 to 3% continue to spend because this simply doesn't affect them, right? Price of eggs, goods, things like that. So not a good sign. We do get tired of giving not great news, but we're going to give the news that is based in fact and data. And this is what's happening. Yeah.
In an earlier interview, Sue described the manufacturing sector as, and the word she used was, there was nothing on the horizon that indicates that this ship is going to get turned around soon. And those consumer sentiment statistics that she just cited are the basis for that.
Yeah.
But you mentioned prices. I mean, the prices index increased just 0.5 percentage point to 58.5%, which I guess is a minor victory. But you mentioned in the report that there were two commodities, steel and aluminum, that are, kind of the basis. And they've been on the up in price list. And those are typically the last two commodities that you typically want to see there. Right. Just discuss what's going on with prices in November.
Yeah, so more of the same there, and as our report said, there's some steel that's up, there's some steel that's down. Aluminum is pretty consistent. I think 24 months is our count so far. I not to pick on one particular industry, but I always keep a sharp eye out for transportation equipment because they've been battered around so much. Think about commercial vehicles, thinking about the drop off of the EV market because the administration's policies are not supportive of that. Think about how much of the content are these metals that are increasing. Think about sensors and batteries and rare earth magnets. So, these guys can't catch a break, and it was, interesting. That's the comment and why it's top of the list about, listen, we're just going to look for more offshoring to try to, preserve some kind of margin here. So everything is not the auto industry and the commercial vehicle industry, but it's interesting because, kind of like transportation services, the work I was in when I worked for FedEx, if the demand is down for trucking and trucking services and, that means, fewer goods are moving through. And if people aren't ordering, they're either hanging on to their fleets for longer because they just can't take these prices or they're just not seeing the demand. So, we pay attention to that. We think folks in DC need to pay attention to that. And I'm hopeful that 10 months is enough time for folks to say, it's not just a blip. It's not just something you wait out. And as the phrase I used earlier, what's on the horizon that's going to make us think this is going to be different. If you have a Supreme Court decision tomorrow, then again, you got to believe, to be confident, you got to believe that tariffs aren't going to show up in another way, and they can. There's other ways they can show up. So we're always hopeful that folks making decisions are going to actually look at data from ISM, from their own economic reports, assuming they have faith in them, and understand and pay attention and listen, right? That's all we can hope for.
Well, yeah, I'm excited. Not excited that we're not going to get third quarter GDP data from the federal government, but I'm excited that we get to talk about this because we typically don't. But it's not also an opportunity to kind of give a little tutorial on how the PMI data works. But yeah, based on historical manufacturing PMI data, we correlated, our ISM correlates it to the national GDP and how that works. The November reading of 48.2%, it corresponds to a 1.7% increase in real GDP on an annualized basis. And a PMI above 42.3% over a period of time generally indicates an expansion of the overall economy. We do discuss that from time to time. But yeah, just an opportunity to talk about, not only how this month's numbers work in correlation with each other, but just how that number, works in general. Just a little tutorial for our viewers, a little chance. Just discuss that.
I think you just gave it, but I'll try.
Yeah.
I think what you said about the 42.3, we do have to remember that. Hopefully we don't have folks thinking all we do is cry wolf and bad news. No, we report data. Over a longer period of time, above a 42.3, we're growing, but we're growing so slow. So slow. So 1.7 increase in GDP. Typically over time, that is what the correlation is, as you said, with a 48.2 PMI. These aren't typical times. So we really do like to see the GDP numbers published so we can, confirm what we've been seeing for decades and decades. But growing at 1.7, while headed toward a contraction, it is not good. And again, the combination of events here for such a perverse is probably not the right word. I just used it anyway. But for, policies to intend to drive a certain behavior, and that's not happening. In fact, the indicators are showing the opposite. So I'm excited to see GDP numbers too. I'm not really confident that it's going to be great news because there's not been a whole lot of that. So that's at least, what it's meant in the past. And, for below a 42.3, That's really, really bad, right? And we came pretty close on the PMI numbers, right? We were pretty low, I think, right after Tim left us, right? And it had crept up, but now we're kind of creeping back down. So again, it's not simple, but it's not that complex to me. If customers aren't ordering, orders aren't going to flow, employment's not going to happen. Inventories are going to stay stagnant. And then if prices are up too, pretty soon you're in the kind of muddied and still water of stagflation, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I get to ask you this question from time to time when we have time to discuss it. It's an opportunity for a big picture look, especially as we're coming to obviously a very crucial time of the year for businesses and manufacturing. I mean, if I'm a CEO or, a high executive, I mean, what are some of the takeaways I should have? Especially as we're going into, just began a fiscal year for a lot of companies and going into a new calendar year, and contracts and purchasing is being reset and all that other great big picture stuff. What should a CEO or a high executive or C-suite person be thinking about when they look at this data?
I think they've got to look at their particular sector, but I think it's a great idea to look at all of it. And might sound a little, silly, but it's like, if you're a CEO of a substantial company, get involved with your Congress people and your senators and make sure they understand the negative impact to the state that you're in, right? So folks want to support, depending on what side of the aisle on, they want to support their president, but they need to understand what's happening in their home state. And so as much as there could be an audience about that, right? Be influential and make sure that your elected representatives are hearing what's going on, right? And, look past maybe the next election and just understand what the long-term health of their particular state or region is going to be based on what customers are actually doing or not doing.
Yeah. Susan, and with anything that I haven't asked or, anything that we haven't talked about, that might be important for this month?
When will we have good news is a question everyone has. Again, I think the court case has to get settled. We have to then maybe understand what the next move will be. But I know I will feel better with at least 3 months in a row of new order increase. That's just that's in my brain that, the 1 month, we all want to get a little excited, but then you got to be able to look the news out of Washington and what's going on and say, all right, what would precipitate this all of a sudden newfound confidence? And, if we see nothing, then we got to treat it as an anomaly. But 3 months is better than just one. So we'll see.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I did want to make an announcement. I was reminded just before we came on the air here that we also have the supply chain planning forecast that ISM puts out. That's going to be coming out on December 16th. And we will have a LinkedIn Live on that where the whole cast will be here. Susan and Steve Miller, the chair of the Services Business Survey Committee, will be here. But yeah, before we have a chance to duck out real quick, just what are you anticipating and what would you like to see? Give us kind of a preview of what you're hoping to see in that data.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't see how we can have a rosy forecast given the last 10 months, but
right.
I want it to make sense based on fact, right? I hate not being able to explain anomalies. I think we're pretty confident in our explanation so far. So, so much depends on, the economic policies here. And, it's not like that's never happened before, but maybe not in such a big way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the supply chain planning forecast, December 16th, where our panelists will not only report how things went in 2025, but they'll also give their expectations for 2026. And we will hope for rays of sunshine wherever we can find them. But hey, Susan, thanks a lot for joining us today. We'll talk to you on the 16th. So
thank you. Talk to you in a few weeks.
Yep. And thanks to you for joining us today. And for more information, feel free to go to ismworld.org, where you can read our roundup article that details a lot of what Susan and I have discussed here. And if you would like to be a part of the manufacturing or business services business survey panels that can help compile data for the ISM PMI reports, you can go to ismworld.org/join the panel for more information. So join us on Wednesday when we break down the ISM Services PMI report with Steve Miller, the chair of ISM Services Business Survey Committee. So for Susan Spence and the people who helped us behind the scenes, they're Christina Cahill and Jennifer Stevens. My name's Dan Zeiger, and we'll see you on Wednesday.